here, town planner, assessment of town land just to see what options are available for development. We've reached out to any and all owners of multifamily properties in the town. We've met with a couple just to see what their situation is, what are the opportunities to perhaps partner to create affordable housing. We've met with some private developers just to introduce them to the Affordable Housing Trust, but also to gauge their interest in any projects they might be considering in town or partnering. So there's been some pretty a strong engagement. Recently, due to COVID and job loss and economic uncertainty, through the generous contribution of an anonymous donor and also some use of some affordable housing trusts, we capitalized a rental and homeownership support program. That has been very important. And I wanted to say, if anyone has got anyone in need, whether they're on the call here, or if there's anyone who is aware of someone who might be in need of support for rental assistance or mortgage assistance, please reach out to Sue Brown. It's a program that's ongoing. It's being administered by Action Inc. in Gloucester. We've gotten the word out through the Cricket and other means, and that's something that we feel it's very important that the Affordable Housing Trust has been pursuing. I think what folks have perhaps seen through articles that we've written in the Cricket and just through the town website, we have partnered with the Housing Authority to assess the properties in the Housing Authority's inventory at Newport, Plains, Loading Place. So what we've done is we've used some of our Affordable Housing Trust funds to pay for a consultant who was selected through a competitive request for proposal process. And they're doing an assessment of each of the properties, including the Pleasant Street DPW property. And their mission really is to do a basic economic analysis, feasibility analysis regarding the introduction of new units on each of the sites. They've been operating for probably about, I guess a month, maybe a month and a half now. And I just want to emphasize that we're in a process. We have received some preliminary sketches from the consultant, and we're getting some very preliminary numbers regarding financial feasibility. But we have done outreach to the Housing Authority by way of a survey. We're reaching out to town members regarding a survey to get a sense of what folks think would be appropriate at the sites. So we've had one look at schematic iterations for each of the sites, Newport, Plains, Pleasant, and Loading Place. But again, I just want to emphasize, nothing has been determined, nothing has been established, nothing other than us committing to working with our consultant and trying to improve their sketches so that we could then share with the the Manchester public. Ultimately, what we're looking at is a possible plan for the introduction and preservation of units at the Housing Authority sites, and perhaps a viable plan at the Pleasant Street site that could activate a development entity through a forthcoming request for proposal. I just want to be clear, we're working with a consultant now. They do not have any developer designation rights. They're just working with us to do the economic feasibility analysis. But what we're hoping is that we have a feasible plan shortly so that we could pursue a request for proposal that we would be able to solicit a developer who would then implement the plan, improve upon the plan by way of pursuing various funding sources, whether it be State Department of Housing, Community Development, and the like. So just in a nutshell, based on what we've been introduced to so far, we're looking at a range of in the 50s to the 70s in terms of new units. And I say again, it's very preliminary, hasn't been vetted by anyone other than us just looking at a scheme. We have not reached out to the housing authority. We haven't reached out to the public. But just at Newport, the consultant is assuming, based on an analysis of the site and site conditions, that an additional 8 to 12 units could be feasible. And what they suggested was an attached single-family style 1 and 2 bedrooms. And as folks might be aware, currently at Newport, there's 32 one-bedrooms. It's a 3-acre site. Part of the problem is it's really, really old. It goes back to 1964. It serves a really important population in town, elderly and younger disabled folks. So based on assessment at a property, the preliminary take is an additional 8 to 12 units. The Plains, which is a much larger site, the consultant was looking at a range of 18 to 20 additional units. And it looked like it would be in a single 3-story multifamily building, including 1 and 2 bedroom units. Folks are probably aware, we're currently right now there's 48 units in 5 buildings. There's a 6th building, but my understanding when I'm there, it sort of combines as an office, sort of like a community center, serves the same population, elderly, younger, disabled. It goes back a ways too. It's 1975, so the thinking is taking stock of that site. We working with the housing authority and working through a process. Right now, it seems like approximately 18 to 20 could be feasible, and I say could be. We'll see what happens based on the community process, the evaluation, and the final feasibility analysis. The Pleasant Street, folks are aware of that. It's the DPW site. It was the focus of pretty intense attention during the master plan process, where folks seem to be open to considering that as a housing development opportunity. When the consultant looked at that, they thought in the range of 24, high end 30 would be appropriate. And they were looking at sort of like a townhouse style, 2-story height, a mix of 2 to 3 bedrooms. That one actually, I think it really personally intrigues me. I think just because it's a vacant site, we can really do some interesting site planning there. There are some site setbacks regarding water and stuff, but that has been factored in by the consultant. And then the last is the loading place. It goes back to 1988. That's right now there's 4 3-bedroom rentals. So that it's a relatively large site. It's about 3 acres, but there's water and there's some development constraints there. The consultant looked at that, and they thought it would be appropriate to have in the range of 8 to 12 new units. Now, I think there's more what ifs there, or uncertainties or issues the housing authority with the Affordable Housing Trust and the town has to consider on that site versus Newport, the Plains, and Pleasant, given that relocation, new construction on that site. So, but I think the Newport, the Plains, and the Pleasant at this preliminary stage, granted it is at an early stage of the process, we're hopeful that we can get a feasible plan that introduces a design that is in character to the town, that will be accepted by not only the residents, but abutters and townsfolk, so that we're in a position to put out a request for a proposal where we will, I'm pretty certain we can get a really strong development partner to pursue the development goals. And if the consultant report is accurate, we're looking in the range of mid-50s to mid-70s of what we would call community affordable housing units. In terms of other initiatives, we have outlined in the town website, the Manchester Affordable Housing Trust. We indicate the availability of funds. It's our CPA funds, and we're basically have got an open invitation to any developer who is interested in uh, advancing community affordable housing, seeking a partner. We have a shingle out, but we don't have anything to show for that at this point in time. I think it'd be important just to note that the Affordable Housing Trust has played some role in discussions regarding the accessory unit. And we were a very interested partner in the Planning Commission's adoption of, I don't know what the technical language was, but we have been supportive of the expansion of the accessory unit in existing single families, or in existing homes in the town. So I don't, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I don't know if folks have any questions or if that was all you wanted from me.
That's a fine first layout. Why don't we ask board members if they have any questions about what the current plans and process are, timelines, anything along those lines.
Yeah, John, I have a question. Eli, may I?
Yep, please.
The timeline, John. That's what I'm particularly interested in. And you did say it's early stages. What kind of timeline for something like this to kind of take shape? That's several years out, is it, or what?
Well, hello, John. I took your question as a couple phases. One, when do you think we'll get a sense of the consultant getting back to us again, wrapping that up, us engaging a little bit further with residents of the developments as well as town folks to sort of get us, an assessment on that. Sue was on the line. Sue, based on our last discussion with the consultant, I heard them say December, but my sense is we're probably going to finish that up the first quarter of 2021. When you think about outreach and vetting and stuff, does that seem accurate?
Yeah, the consultant was going to deliver, was hoping that their final deliverable would be in December. So basically they need to do the modeling to see if the financial fit the site capacity that they've worked out. And our contract says December, but I would highly doubt and agree with you, it would be the first quarter.
I agree. My sense, I wouldn't be surprised if it goes out. So John and others, that's really just a sense of how the consultant concludes. So let's assume that we have a favorable, realistic plan of development. We would then probably work with the housing authority to issue a request for proposal. My sense, that would take a couple months. We're talking about by the middle of 2021, we probably keep the RFP out for maybe 2-3 months. My sense is we could have a developer end of 2021, maybe early 2022. And then that's where it gets interesting, because depending on the funding sources from the state, Department of Housing and Community Development primarily, and assuming it's rental, they're quite competitive. This development that we're talking about will probably rely on multiple funding sources, one of which is a tax credit program. And DHCD, they're known, it's very competitive. So assuming they apply in early 2022, my sense, they will be rejected. So we're looking at 2023, and we'll cross our fingers and hope that we'll get funding there. So we're looking at perhaps the end of 2023, where we would be talking about finalizing the construction bid and all the details that would go into preparing for construction. I know there was some discussion about a separate source of funds through the State Department of Housing and Community Development Public Housing Authority. And it was a stream of funding that was for state-run housing authority. If we could establish a vein into that source, and if it's sufficient in and of itself, we might be able to expedite the fund approval process and maybe, start a little bit earlier. But based on my experience, I wouldn't be surprised if it's 2022, but probably 2023. I know it sounds like, man, we're sitting here, it's 2020. You're telling me 3 years, but unfortunately, that is the state of affairs when you're dealing with state housing finance.
Okay, thank you.
Eli, I have a couple questions, if I may.
Sure, go ahead, Becky.
Hi, John. I just in case some people don't know, RFP stands for Request for Proposal. That was just a clarification.
Thank you.
But I wanted to ask you, when you were going through all the information, I missed of the 8 to 12 potential new units at Loading Place. What sizes, how many bedrooms will those potentially be?
Becky, in my sense, it will probably be 2 and 3 bedroom.
Okay, and then
But
the
again,
number.
I just
I'm
want to emphasize that it is preliminary, and I don't want to get out over my skis too much, because again, we haven't
Right.
even reached out to folks. And I think if there's any site that's sensitive, it's going to be the Loading Place, just because we're dealing with a population there where the consultant was saying, if we want to achieve the new construction objective that some people might want to promote, it could involve demolition. So we're talking about some intense notification, intense relocation. So it gets complicated.
Absolutely. And then so looking over at these numbers and having gotten the most recent iteration of the housing production plan, so are these units potentially being looked at and potentially proposed to the numbers that the housing production plan is looking for creating within the next 5 years? Do you know? And I just saw that today. So this is a question. I'm just wondering if these are all done in concert with those numbers. And Sue Brown might be better to answer that one.
I was almost going to say to Sue on that one. Becky, I thought you were leading to, if we were to go in this direction, and if like 3 or 4 years from now we have these new units, would they qualify as under the state housing inventory, and would it apply against our 10%? And I would say yes. They would be the affordable units that would qualify under the state's criteria.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for the clarification on that, John. And maybe Sue could answer my question then.
Sure. So realizing that these are preliminary numbers, the housing consultant did look at those as potentially what she put in for housing production numbers in that chart. And don't blame John, because he just got that today. That
Oh, I
housing
know, we all
production
did.
plan.
Yeah.
I also just wanted to preface his timeline, which seems long, actually isn't that long, but it also would
Right.
be dependent on the release of the DPW site, because we assume that this might only work with those numbers and that financial incentive of that site, and that will have a life of its own and will require a town meeting approval to release that site and then to move the DPW. So there are a lot of moving pieces that would guarantee that it would be longer than we would suspect.
Absolutely. Thank you for that clarification, Sue. And just to go back, I was I was not in any way trying to imply that John didn't have, I know that this just came out today that I was just looking over it a little bit.
I know you weren't.
So it's in no ways trying to, I know we're all looking at a lot of moving parts. So thank you very much. So thank you, John. Thank you, Eli.
Jeff Bodmer-Turner and Ann Harrison.
I have one question, John. Make sure I'm unmuted here. Yes. I have one question, which is that when you're talking about new units and at the beginning, you said 50 to 70 and then parsed out numbers over the 4 different properties. You were clear that the Pleasant Street property would be high-end townhouses. Is that a mixed development as well? Would there be affordable housing in that particular property? And what percentage of all of these units would be affordable housing?
Yeah, hi, Jeff. Sorry about the confusion. When I was referring to the Pleasant, first off, I appreciate what Sue mentioned. I don't want to be presumptuous. It's still town property and it's a whole process and procedures that have to go with that in the event that it were to convert to housing. I just want to emphasize that the consultant is just looking at that. And I didn't mean to imply that the Pleasant Street development, if it were to occur, would be high end, i.e. higher income. I think what the Affordable Housing Trust is looking at in partnership with the Housing Authority is to try to maximize, at a minimum, preserve the affordability at each of the public housing sites and to promote new affordable housing in town. So without looking at final numbers, and I don't want to put the other affordable housing trusts members on the spot, but I would say we'd want to maximize the number of affordable units, but we don't have an exact number. But we see that site as a resource to meet a town goal of increasing community affordable housing.
It is the intention, John, and I followed this earlier in the process, and I've not unfortunately followed it as closely more recently. Is the intention that all the sites will be mixed sites of affordable housing and I don't want to say not affordable housing, but other housing?
It's possible. When we put out our request for proposal that led to the selection of our consultant, we recognized a particular state Department of Housing and Community Development funding source that, while put out to preserve and enhance the preservation of current housing authority units, they were looking for opportunities to introduce market units and thus bring in increasing revenue to help the operation of the housing authority site and to perhaps maybe even help in the financing of new units. So we outlined that in the RFP. I don't have any economic analysis from the consultant just yet. So that's on the back of their mind. We'll soon see what has been or will be proposed for that. And that's something that we can consider with our partner, the Housing Authority, as well as Housing Authority residents, as well as, the town in general, because these are, I don't need to tell you, Jeff, these are important. We have limited sites in town and these are opportunities. So we're going to do it together with folks.
Okay, thank you, John.
Yeah.
And thank you and the trust for all the work you're doing to bring this to the place that it's come to. I know I was looking in on this about a year ago, and it's moving. And you've got the consultant, and the consultant's on the verge of producing a report in the next few months, and that's all wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Ann Harrison, any questions?
Yes. is the expectation that a single developer would handle all of these projects, or that we could go forward with one here and one there?
That's a great question, and that I think that is to be determined. I mean, clearly we'll have a financial analysis, a development scenario as a product of the consultant report. Then it would be up to us as a town, starting with the Housing Authority, Affordable Housing Trust, working with the Housing Authority, with residents and town to determine what would be the best vehicle. I mean, we would have to issue a request for proposal. It's not uncommon to say a developer can apply to one site or all sites. Yeah, when I do that, I tend to find that it attracts a larger developer who's more interested in all of the sites because they tend to promote an economy of scale. I think when the State Department of Housing and Community Development looks at funding, they tend to look at projects that are a little bit larger. So if we're looking at the range of 40 to 60 units, that's not really considered, that's sort of in the sweet spot of funding that the Department of Housing and Community Development provides. So that's something we could determine. I wouldn't be surprised if it would be one developer, but that's something that we could work on. I think what will be important is the objectives and the mission and the criteria that we outline in the request for proposal. If we're clear in that, and then we will control the destiny of who it is that the Housing Authority, with the Affordable Housing Trust, with the support of the town, who we develop, because they will then implement that vision.
I guess I understand the advantages of scale, but the Loading Place Road has so many problems, and the Pleasant Street still would have to go through a town meeting, which is, tends to add a year to everything. It seems as if we wanted to get housing sooner, taking the places that we already own and trying to encourage someone to work there would be a good thing.
Excellent. I think those are very excellent, well-made points. Yes. Timing, exactly.
Yeah. Thank you very much for all of your work. This is not it's been decades since anybody's made any progress on this. It's great to see something happening. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I only had one question for either John or Sue. So of these different units, some or hopefully most would be affordable, but some might not. Some might be market rate. Do we get to count the market rate ones against our affordable housing inventory or not?
I would say not, but Sue, I'm sort of getting outside of, it could be, because it's not well, I guess it depends on what type of plan is proposed and how it's being advanced at the state. If it's a 40B, yeah, if you get over a certain number of affordable units, then all of the units would qualify. But Sue, can you clarify that?
I think we can't clarify until we know the framework of the ownership and of how these are going to be packaged. So we're assuming all rental at this point, but we don't know that that's the case, and we don't know if sites will be able to commingle. I think it's really up in the air whether all would be counted or not. It's unlikely that they would all be affordable, just based on early conversations with the consultant, but I'm not sure if they'll all be countable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Eli,
Sorry.
this is John.
Yes, John.
I have a comment on that as speaking with a number of folks with regard to our research. And one of the folks on the zoning board in one of the towns indicated that under 40Bs, if all the units are rented, they all count, the affordable ones and the market rate ones. If you're going to sell them, only affordable ones will count. So they make that distinction as long as it's being pursued under a 40B.
Okay. Any other questions from board members for?
If I may just add one comment, I think at this point we should be looking at making units that are affordable rather than making units that count as affordable. And the problem in town is not that we don't have enough fake units counting toward our affordables. We don't have any place for people who can't pay market rate rents.
I agree in the philosophical sense. And I would emphasize that my question was purely tactical. All right, Mr. Feuerbach, thank you very much for your presentation this evening. And thank you very much for your work and the trust's work over the past few years.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on now to getting some input from Jeff Bodmer-Turner and John Round regarding reporting on contacts that they made with other towns regarding how they dealt with 40Bs. John Round, you want to go first?
Yes, I can, and thank you, Eli. Jeff and I pursued a few towns with the objective of trying to get a sense of what the critical issues were when they were considering 40Bs and how those critical issues were addressed in their discussions with developers, and how the proposals came out in the end. In other words, what kind of concessions did they get? How did the projects change as a result of the discussions? We pursued, at least for a start here, we pursued the references that were provided by SLC, and they were units that they had been involved with in Newton, in Needham, and a couple in Winchester. I did manage to speak with some folks in Newton and in Needham. These are people who are on the zoning board. They were selectmen. They were involved in planning or housing programs within the town, and got to learn quite a bit about how 40Bs are going with them. Now, I have to say that when we're trying to compare their experience with us, it's a little bit difficult because I spoke with Needham and Newton. They're very big towns, and they have concerns and issues that are probably a bit different from what we have. And they tend to build out projects that are in, both towns are mature, so they tend to be in settled areas. They've got lots of abutters and that sort of thing. And we've got a different set of challenges. I do hope to speak with someone tomorrow from Marion. Marion is in the South Shore. It's about the same size we are, 5,000 people, and it's on the ocean. There are a lot of similarities there, and they are kind of finishing up a 40B program that they, perhaps they will issue a permit for in the next couple of months or so. But they have gone through the LIP program. But with the discussions that I have, I think there are probably 3 or 4 things that came out from all of that. And the challenge is these projects have a long life. And for the projects I'm dealing with that were provided as references, they were done in 2000 or started in 2014, 2015, 2016. And when you're trying to get a hold of folks who were around at that time, either as selectmen or in town government or something, that's a challenge. And I really wanted to find out something about the experience. You can get a hold of some of the documents that say this is where we are, but it doesn't necessarily say, well, how did we get there to wind up with the permit that we've got? But I did find some people that were around 6 and 7 and 8 years ago and do recall some of those discussions. There are a couple of themes that came out of there. You can get design changes on your projects, and the projects that were in question, the one in Newton was 38 units. The one in Needham was 390. So they were very different sized projects. The 390 started out as 490. So they were able to get that number down. The one in Newton at 36, it was 36, it stayed at 36. There was a request to try and get it perhaps down to 32, but that became uneconomic, and the developer couldn't make the numbers work there. So it did stay at 36. However, it started out as 36 units, all of them 3 bedrooms. And they shrunk that program down, and only 5 of them ended up being 3 bedrooms. The majority of them were 2 bedrooms. I think there were 27, and there were a few that wound up being 1 bedrooms. So they did shrink that down. The footprint of that particular building initially was about 38,000 square feet, which means that building was largely, I think, no more than 2 floors, and much of it was 1 floor living. That footprint shrunk from 38,000 to 19,000. So you know that the building went up, and it became a lot smaller because there were a lot fewer bedrooms. So there can be changes in design, basic design, in some of the cosmetics that are involved. And I know that's another challenge that we have here. There were some minor changes, but the folks couldn't necessarily comment a great deal about that. With regard to average median income, all of the units or all of the programs that I discussed with these folks, they were all at 80%. They couldn't comment whether there was a positioning to make it less than that. And I will say that in our conversations, both of these communities have had multiple 40Bs. So while we were looking at one particular project, they could comment about some of the others. And they all pretty much were at 80% of the median area median income for the affordable parts. All of the towns had local preference. I don't know what the percentages were, and they couldn't necessarily recall, but they did say that local preference only is for the first lottery. It disappears after that. So when the building first becomes available for occupancy, they set up a lottery system for the affordable groups, and the local folks do have an advantage, but after that, that goes away, and the affordable pool is just one pool, and that's it. With regard to the developer, Strategic Land Ventures, they did not necessarily know the name Strategic Land Ventures, but everybody knew the Englers. And here, I mean, the lead partner, I think, is Jeff Engler here. And his father was also very active. They are very active in Newton, Needham, all of suburban Boston, have been active for quite a while, and active in civic activities as well. Both Needham and Newton people with whom I spoke thought well of them. The project seemed to go along fairly smoothly, and the LIPs were issued, and then it went through the zoning board. In one of the projects, and I think it was the Newton project, there was some concern from one of the abutters who brought suit. They didn't like the way things looked, and there were some minor changes that were made as a result. But both projects that the Englers had worked on, and the Strategic Land Ventures had worked on, are up and running. It's still too soon to know if what the plans were in terms of the specifications and traffic mediation and expectations with regard to some of the other specifics, if they worked out. But the people I spoke with were not aware of any problems with these properties. So we still need, that's only a couple of projects and 2 very large communities that have had experience with the number of 40Bs over the years. It's still a small number, but the information is such that they all go through, and in one way or the other. But there are certainly changes that have been made for them that the communities and their concerns have been able to be brought to the fore and incorporated into the final product. So I'll have more news, I think, probably the next time we get together. I expect to speak with probably a couple of more towns. It's a little struggle to get a hold of people, as you can imagine.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So what I'm going to do is ask Jeff for you to give your report, and then if any board members have any questions, we'll ask them of either John or Jeff as appropriate.
I can give a lot briefer report. In my conversations with John, as we tried to set up consistent questions that we were going to inquire about, all that came together over the weekend. And then I started yesterday trying to contact people in Winchester. The Winchester projects are older. They're about, as John was mentioning, they came online about 3 to 4 years ago, and finding people has been a bear. The contacts that I've tried to do have not yielded anybody who could talk to me about the projects. I'm starting in on Hingham, which is a little bit closer to configuration that's similar to ours, although their population is about 3.5 times ours. They are seaside, and it's a lip that they have. But I have not had any contact with people in Hingham either. So by the time we meet again on this, I expect that I will have information from both Hingham and Winchester, and possibly one other community.
Okay. So questions from board members, Anne and Becky.
I do have one, Eli, and this is equally applicable to either John or Jeff. And I'm just wondering, are the communities to which you reached out, were these all LIPs, or were they otherwise non-friendly 40Bs? I'm just curious about that.
Winchester is not an LIP. There's two projects in Winchester, and neither one of them was friendly. But there's a lot to learn from that as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And for Needham and Newton, both of those were LIPs, LIPs.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anne?
Thank you both for a thankless chore. Keep at it. Maybe starting by contacting a town clerk, for example, who might have access to more history, give you better lists of who was involved at the time. My only thought.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's where we started, or that's where I started, and works out pretty well. They're pretty knowledgeable in terms of who to talk to.
But how to reach them, that's another.
Well, yeah, and how to reach them, but they would not have been around when these projects were going in general.
Yeah.
They wouldn't know anything about the projects.
Thank you very much.
All right. So I don't have any questions so far. I look forward to hearing about Marion and Winchester and Hingham. When you guys get more information, thank you very much for the information so far. Okay, let's move on to Greg Federspiel. Any information? So Greg, you're going to be looking or trying to contact town administrators. Any success so far?
So making some progress, a little easier to get a hold of people who are working rather than who are volunteers. So or tracking down a retired colleague or two as well. So my comments are based on some conversations with folks in Marblehead and Littleton, as well as Marion, though I have some follow-up conversations with all three. And there's a couple more that I'm working on to contact. But some common themes are emerging, and some are familiar to us in terms of what we're thinking and are embarking on. As John mentioned, most projects do see a reduction in size. typically what the developer first puts on the table is not what they expect to get in the end. And so usually can be successful in negotiating, at least the projects that I was getting examples from. They all were able to trim the size of the project. A lot of my colleagues were certainly focused on infrastructure issues. For example, the Marion lip really focuses on wastewater. That was a major concern of theirs. And the selectmen there, through their negotiations with the developer, made sure that the developer was paying for the needed improvements to their wastewater system and making pretty substantial contributions to make sure that those improvements could continue. The importance of having some consultants helping to do the peer review and sort of proofing or checking some of the assumptions that the developer may be putting forth. Though folks did caution me, Littleton cautioned me, for example, that fiscal impacts are not a criteria by which you can deny a project. So yes, there's a lot of concern about fiscal impacts, but the state doesn't allow us to deny a project based on negative fiscal impacts. So don't get your hopes up for saying, okay, this is a negative impact, so we can say no. Unfortunately, the law doesn't allow us to do that. Having said that, they worked hard in the negotiations to mitigate fiscal impacts. And that's where a lot of the focus was. And folks who have been to both a friendly and non-friendly. So in the friendly prospect, in the LIP, you can focus on negotiating some fiscal givebacks or mitigations. Whereas during the conventional or so-called non-friendly, the ZBA is not able to extract concessions on a fiscal basis from the developer. So that's something to keep in mind as we go forward. I'm not saying we will necessarily be successful with an endorsement, but trying will allow us to have a better shot at getting some mitigating fiscal measures out of the project. And so I thought that was a pretty important point that was emphasized from a couple of them. And the last point that came through was, it's a bit of an odd process in that we are starting at the very front end trying to negotiations when we don't know all the details of the project. And we've talked a little bit about this, but again, colleagues I spoke to sort of emphasize this, that the details of the project really are designed to come through the ZBA process. So that's when you really get into the nitty-gritty. The ZBA will be working hard on that aspect, and the peer review, that's where the peer review typically kicks in full steam. Developers are a little reluctant to get into peer review at this stage. They will, but they prefer to save it mostly for the ZBA. So the takeaway was a couple of folks emphasized focus on sort of the global performance standards that you want to see, and leave the details of how those standards might be met to the ZBA and to the expert testimony that'll take place at the ZBA level. So for example, at our last meeting, we were talking about nutrient loading. And so you may come up with a sort of a general standard that says no net loading of nutrients beyond the property line. So you don't go into the details of how that gets accomplished. You leave it up to the ZBA and expert testimony that will take place at that level to get at the finer points of how that's achieved. Stormwater runoff, similarly, no net gain in runoff, perhaps is the standard. You don't specify how that's going to be done at this early stage, but it's something that you might put in as a condition. The developer agrees to it, and then it's up to the second phase here, the ZBA process, for how to best achieve that standard that you've established. So those are some of the key takeaways that I was able to glean. I will continue to reach out to a few other communities. Bill Ricca has had a few lips, wanted to follow up with them. As I said, doing some follow-up with Marion and some follow-up also with Marblehead and Littleton, and there are a few others out there that we'll be tracking down.
Okay, thanks. Board members, questions for Greg?
I have one question for Greg, Eli.
Yep.
And it was just if he wouldn't mind repeating one thing. He was talking about the importance of consultants, peer review, and there was one other thing, and I didn't get that. I was wondering if somebody could repeat that for me.
In terms of a resource?
Yeah, you were talking about in terms of common themes. One was size reduction. The other, you were talking about a common theme being that the importance of using consultants, peer reviewers, and one other thing. And if it, I know you were going through your whole sharing info. If you want to get back to me on that, that's fine. I just
Might
wanna
it
make
be
sure.
that fiscal contributions have to be done through the LIP, that the ZBA can't? No, okay.
Wasn't that one, but thank you.
Yeah, maybe the infrastructure focus. I don't know. If that
It was one of those along the lines of using our consultants and getting peer review, and it was one other aspect along those lines. And maybe I totally have that wrong. So
Yeah,
it was.
I'll think, okay,
Okay.
I'll think about it. See what else I was saying. But we can talk offline a bit more.
Okay, thank you. And that's the problem with trying to make notes is you miss things. So
Yeah.
there we go. I do anyway. Thank you.
And I'll just close to say that a couple of them have failed at reaching agreements. The LIP process ended up a bust, if you will. The project went forward as a standard 40B. The project eventually went forward. It got permitted under the comprehensive permit. They felt like they were able to get some of the things that they wanted through the comprehensive permit, but they felt like they didn't get as many. But they felt like they couldn't sell out. They had to hold out for that. It was okay that they didn't come to terms under the LIP, and that it went forward as a conventional. That it was worth a try, but it's not the end of the world if it doesn't happen. So you don't need to negotiate away your soul to get the LIP approved, I guess is what the comment was.
So when that happened, so they went through the negotiation process towards the LIP, but they were not able to get some of the key aspects that they were looking for, or was that what happened?
Yes. I can find out a little more detail about that, but that's my understanding, yes.
Yeah, I'm a little curious about the nature of the things that tripped them up when they were found unacceptable when they went through that process.
Yeah, I can try to follow up, Eli, and see if I can get more details on that.
All right. Any other questions from board members?
Yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
And go
Just-
first.
I think it was John who mentioned that all of the projects went through at 80% of the now I've forgotten the acronym.
AMI.
AMI,
Yes.
yeah.
Did you get any feeling for how much that was pushed? And Greg, did you find any cases where the affordable units were more affordable?
So there were a few
Okay,
cases where they would have some of the affordable at, say, 60%, but not all. I don't think again, I have to check my notes, but I don't think any of them all had all of the affordable at that lower percentage for AMI. So some are lower, but the rest were at the 80.
And I did have a comment that came, I can't remember which person with whom I spoke, but it mentioned and said, if you go below the 80%, if you go to 60% or even 50%, a lot of times the developers, if they're going to go that route, they have to get outside funding. This, of course, has no outside funding. The market rate units are going to support the affordable units. But when you go lower, and that obviously means the rents go lower, sometimes they said in their experience, the developers have had to go to get some government subsidies of one sort or another to kind of make things fit together.
That's
I don't want to.
And Mr. Doucette, would you be kind enough to mute yourself? Go ahead, Ann.
my, back of the envelope calculation says that I would think that the market rate units in Manchester would be well above market rate units in some of those other towns. And that makes the percentage of decline in revenue from lowering the percent of AMI less of a factor. That's something I would really like us to work on, because the numbers that we're looking at, don't look real affordable to me.
Okay. Other questions for Greg from board members?
Yes, Eli. Greg, I had a question about the consultants, and you had mentioned that, a lot of them really do their work, I suppose, at the zoning board level when you get into the details. And we're sitting here with a lip analysis, and for some of the areas where we want to have a consultant look, there's not a whole lot to look at yet. I'm looking at the environmental concerns, which are really pretty much, I think, the most critical and most important that we have to look at, whether it be sewer, stormwater, the whole thing. And of course, there's no program there. And Jeffrey Engler did say that they put together the details, I suppose, at the zoning level. But I assume that the consultant, whoever we're going to pull in, they're going to run with us the whole program. In other words, whatever we need for them at the lip, and then they'll be around for the zoning board thing. Is that the way this is going to work?
Yes, typically that is, yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
I'm just scratching my head what we're going to ask an environmental consultant to do.
So I think that environmental consultant could lay out for you what various permitting standards they will be required to meet, and help you understand what those standards are and how strict they are, and if there are opportunities, necessary or not, to try to beef those standards up. So I think it's sort of at that level that they could provide some assistance at this stage.
All right, so they'll educate us on standards, and that's important because and what we think of them, those standards. So that's good.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's no other questions, then I think that might be a very good segue into the next portion of this meeting. So the next part of the meeting is the Board of Selectmen is going to discuss the 3 areas of consultants that are being proposed, and I'll ask Greg to give a summary of those 3 areas in just a minute. And what I want to do is go over some of the high-level instructions that we would want to be giving to those consultants. And then town staff can go and refine that into a more detailed list, and can go out and start to build a list of consultants and potentially get their availability for us and an estimate on the sort of dollars it would take to do the projects, do the consultant work, and when they might be able to get numbers back to us. And then what I'm thinking is that the basic terms that we would hire consultants at under would be something that we would ratify at a meeting on the December 7th or at the latest December 14th. We can discuss this tonight. So we have received some input from Planning Board and the Manchester-Essex Conservation Trust and Conservation Commission and the Sustainability Committee. We're still chewing through some of that input. But Greg, if you could give a little summary of the proposed consultants and some of the proposed current areas that we might pursue with them, we can get into this discussion. And I would like to limit this discussion to, let's say, 45 minutes, at the end of which we have some high-level instructions for town staff. That would be Greg and Sue to produce the more detailed instructions for consultants. And then after that, we could get into public comment.
Okay, so in terms of the 3 more critical areas that you've identified, so environmental, as John mentioned a little earlier, environmental impacts, environmental protection. Second area is the whole traffic impact area, not only at the site itself, different intersections further downstream, if you will, as well as impacts, community-wide, down, at the train station, more cars trying to get into the Singing Beach parking lot, that sort of thing. So that's the second major area. And then the third major area being the fiscal impacts. So what are the extra services that are likely to be required, municipal services, and so the cost of those services compared to what new revenues may be generated. There are other areas, of course. We've talked about design, aesthetics, but some of those areas perhaps are best left to the ZBA process. So you could certainly put together some basic standards performance criteria. Regarding fiscal impacts, talking with Jonathan Witten from KP Law, who's been helping us with this whole process, he strongly recommended going with the firm RKG Associates. They've done peer reviews of 40B projects extensively. He's worked with them, speaks very highly of them, and I do have a proposal from them that we could go forward with. And they would do a review of what the consultant has prepared in their fiscal impact study and could help us walk through those numbers, sort of kick the tires, if you will, on the study, but also suggest ways to try to mitigate some of the fiscal impacts of the project. So the proposal from RKG, as I say, I have it in hand. And if you were interested in getting a green light on that, we could get that underway very soon. Concerning traffic and environmental and even the design concerns, I look towards some of the larger engineering firms that could provide a sort of a one-stop shop for us and would have the various disciplines in-house as we toggle back and forth between the various aspects. And so I've got a couple of firms that are preparing proposals for us now that I hope to have by next week. And as I say, sort of focusing on firms that have the firepower in-house, hydrologists and traffic engineers, civil engineers, architects, landscape architects, all in-house, and they could respond to a number of concerns and issues that come up under the environmental heading and the traffic heading, as well as design issues and concerns down the road. And talking to one of the firms this afternoon, they feel like they could get to this and fit it into their schedule right off the bat. They could get underway in the next week or so, if that is something that you want to pursue. They haven't given me a final number yet. They're still working on that, but I will have that at the latest by the 1st of next week. So I did have a conversation with Jeff Engler from SLV, and he wants to review the proposals, but he indicated a willingness to provide us the funds for these peer reviews at this stage. He indicated that, again, it's something that they normally do at the ZBA level, but he could see where this initial work would help and speed up the ZBA process. So he was willing to help us at this stage.
So good to unmute myself. So let's take the timeline last, and let's discuss the consultants and high-level directives first. Why don't we take fiscal first? Questions or comments from the board on the fiscal impact or fiscal analysis and some high-level direction that we want to give to the consultants.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Man, oh.
Yeah, Sarah, whatever. I answered almost anything. Susie, particularly if anyway, on the fiscal and on the traffic, I would like to see our consultants consider the impacts, both of the proposal at 157 units and at 120.
Yes. Yep.
I think, I know that there's a great deal of pressure in town to reduce the size of the project, and I want to know that reducing the size of the project is going to have the effect that we hope, or vice versa. So that's my first concern.
Anything else right now?
Not from me.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I think that the primary concern that I have in terms of fiscal is some way of determining from unit configuration what kind of school age population we're looking at. You know, we put that as a question in the questionnaire that John and I developed to talk to the other towns about their projects. And John's takeaway from Newton and Needham was that they were so big that any project of the sizes that they were talking about wasn't going to have a huge impact on their school system. But we're a small school system, and it would shift costs under the district agreement. There's all kinds of impacts that can happen that can come out of that. So some way of determining the number of school-age children that would be associated with a project of the proposed size and the reduced size that Ann mentioned. I think it's much harder to look at the impacts on fire and public safety, police. But obviously we'd like to have some understanding of what might happen there. But my primary concern is with the impact on schools.
John and Becky?
Eli, if I may, I'd like to, and I'm not sure where this would fall, but to be looking at if we kind of do what Ann was saying earlier, but if we were to look at fewer of the 3-bedroom units and more of the 1 or 2, and potentially decreasing the AMI for some of those units based on a perceived higher at market rate. So I guess that falls under fiscal, but would that make sense to try it rather than just reducing the number of units, but knowing what percent of those units are going to be 1 or 2 or 3 bedroom and trying to decrease the 3-bedroom?
But just a note of caution, Becky, that the state will require a minimum percentage of units be 3-bedroom. And I forget what that percentage is, but I think the 16 out of the 157 was at or close to that minimum percentage that the state will require it to have.
I do, yeah, I recall that. But thank you for reminding me. Now that you said that, it brought that memory back. Okay, so I guess that's off the, scratch that one.
John? You're muted, John.
Zoom 101. Greg, I assume that these consultants will look at the methodologies that were put together. And I mean, I don't know if there are standard ones that they use, because a lot of assumptions go into this that, you know, you make smart assumptions, but you can look at it a number of different ways. And I assume that they will speak about that, because I'm interested in finding or in learning, you know, what the methodologies are and what seems to be most reliable. And
Yes,
and
yes.
also, they'll come up with a report and they say maybe it's whatever the number is, the number is. I would like the consultant to make some sort of comment with regard to, well, what if the numbers don't add up and things are really way off from what they are expected to be? What is typical recourse?
So just a quick response to that is in looking at some of the decisions that that different 40B projects have some have in as a condition that after the project is 80% or 100% occupied, the developer needs to do a post-analysis, post-construction analysis of, say, traffic intersection impacts. And if the impacts are higher than what was predicted, then additional improvements would be required for the developer to make. So I have seen that in a few of the decisions.
All right, so that would be something that might be an ask for us, that we need
Yes.
to follow up to know where we're at. Okay.
Right.
Yep. Okay. I hope that's all in the report then. Good.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Ann.
I don't know where this would fit exactly. But one of the things that in their introductory material, they describe the project as having 40 affordable units, and in the details, it's 39. And they have slightly rounded up to get to 25%. And is there some place where we can say at least 25% and get an additional affordable unit? You don't have that answer off the top of your head, Eli?
You can always ask. Yeah, you can certainly ask that.
Okay, does that need to be in anybody's report of the categories that we're currently talking about?
That might be a
Not sure.
John Whitten.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it'll really change the various impacts. It'll change their performa a little bit, but I don't see that as a big lift.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, Eli, I have one more question.
Sure.
And that is, do we have somebody, or will the fiscal consultant be able to look at SLV's numbers in terms of their economics and what is their what we're likely to be able to ask and at what point the cutoff is? Again, because rents around here are pretty high, I would think that they stand to do fairly well in terms of rentals, since the bulk of them are at market. But so do we have a consultant who will look at those numbers that might give us a little bit more leverage?
Yes, I'm sure that they would be happy to do some analysis along those lines.
Does that make sense?
It does, yes.
Thank you.
All right, and the only thing that I was going to confirm is that this is going to cover also their analysis of the impact to the fire and police operational budgets.
Right.
One thing that we need to consider in all this, as we talk about reducing the project size, is if you reduce the project size, the overall tax revenues go down. Because if the project size is smaller, the value of the project is less, and the taxable value of the property is less. So there's an equation that, I don't know, I'm sure they have models for this, where as you reduce that size, your revenues go down, and does that start to have an impact on us in terms of the services that we provide, et cetera?
Well, that'd be covered. Well, one of the earlier comments was that the analysis be done for both 120 and 157 units.
So part of that analysis, I'm suggesting, Eli, will have to include not just, it will be the impact on revenues to the town. That may seem obvious to everybody but me, but
Well, no, it's worth stating. All right. We've spent about 20 minutes on that one. I'd like to move on to the next one. Let's do traffic and then environmental. Oh, and I actually made a mistake because I said, let's spend some time on traffic and environmental, and we'd spend about 45 minutes on that and then move into public comment. We still need to talk about timeline for when we're going to approve those. So we'll have another 5 or 10 minutes talking about that. Aiming for 15-minute discussion on traffic now and major highlights. Who wants to go first? John Round? John Round.
I can, yes, Eli. One comment on that, Greg, if at one of the previous meetings, and maybe it was the first one that SLV was at, they said that they would do a follow-up traffic study associated with the intersection at Pleasant and School. And any assessment that we have should include that particular intersection, which I think is pretty important to all of us. So I don't know what the timing is for all of that, and I don't know where SLV is in. Was it Van Ness, I think, who was the consultant for that? But they need to get back in touch and start to put something together on that.
Jeff Bodmer-Turner.
well, in terms of that particular issue of that intersection, I've said this before, but it bears repeating. When that's done really matters, because right now we don't have anybody attending in the high school, students, I mean, and that traffic goes up considerably. I can actually get out of my house and drive down the street at between 7:30 and 8 o'clock in the morning without having to wait 20 to 30 minutes to get out of my driveway. So it's really important that if any of that analysis is done, that it's done after the high school resumes session with students.
You know, the timing might be hard for that, but I'm thinking, Jeff, the police department does all kinds of traffic studies on a fairly regular basis, and they might have some historical data from 2 or 3 years ago in terms of cars going down that part of School Street. Might be worth checking.
They may, John. I've been over that data a lot with them. I don't recall Lincoln Street as being a.
Lincoln or School or whatever.
Well, Lincoln Street's going to give you the school traffic.
Yes, it will. Yes, it will.
So let's just state the high-level concern and make it the consultant's problem to figure it out.
Yeah, but I want this consultant to be directed to think about that in terms of when the high school's in session.
Yep. Ann Harrison.
I think this falls into traffic. I would like them to consider the proposal that I've seen a lot about having a shuttle bus. I would like to know how many people they think the shuttle would serve and what time frames it would be. My recollection, and it's vague, not unusual, is that there's some problem with the funding for the Council on Aging bus and the CTA, the Cape Ann Transit. And I remember some years ago, we were faced with a choice between the two and decided that the Council on Aging was much more beneficial. And I'd hate to see us get into a problem. I'd like to know that there are going to be more than 3 people on that shuttle every day.
Becky.
Yes, I wanted to, just looking at some of the traffic concerns that we've received from others, most notably Planning Board. The concerns regarding parking at certain areas in town. And I think that is, you know, if with both the 157 units and the 120 and the potential for 7 to 10% population growth in town after this, I think it merits looking at places like the MBTA parking, Singing Beach, Tux Point, and what impacts we might get from those.
Okay, from my side, I'm interested in, I would augment Ann Harrison's comment just to say as well, it'd be very useful to know what the cost of a shuttle would be, because if we're going to be asking ultimately, or potentially might be asking for a contribution, it'd be nice to know what the fiscal parameters are for that. And I agree with the other board members that the traffic study should really be extended to include the School Street and Pleasant Street intersection. And I'm interested very much in the projected impact of parking downtown, since that's been a perennial and significant issue for us. There was also a question from the planning board about the tipping point that would require a traffic light. Planning board was more general, possibly overly broad. They said at any location in town. I don't think you can scope it as high as that, but I'm certainly interested in when we start getting into the business of needing potentially a traffic light at School Street and Pleasant Street, or at the intersection coming out of the development. And that's, I think, the other questions that have been proposed, and the comments from the board answer most of my high-level questions, or cover most of my high-level questions. Anything else from board members? All right, we're back on track for time. Let's move on to environmental. 15 minutes on environmental. So, who wants to go first?
I think that one thing that's going to be really important for us to understand, we had some comments from John Whitten on this the other night, but one thing that's going to be very important for us to understand is what's going to be required of the project through DEP, what's going to be required of the project through any other environmental review at the state level, so that we know where we might need to beef that up given the sensitive area that this project is moving into, and how close it is to that sensitive area. So I would really like to have a much better understanding of what the process is that they're going to have to go through with the state and what's going to be required of them. And beyond that, there's all the issues that we've been discussing, but they get down into some pretty fine detail. So I was encouraged by Greg's feedback from the other towns about suggestions like saying no net stormwater runoff. That's a really great thing. And the question for the consultant is, can that be determined? And what are the consequences if it's not? I mean, what if the consequences if it's exceeded? So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jakes.
I actually have a lot of concerns in this department, but I think most of those are going to be overseen by either the DEP, state, or ZBA. I would really like to see the consultant, and I agree with Jeff. I would like to understand more of this aspect of the process and the types of things that we as the Board of Selectmen should be looking at and asking. But I think in terms of after the unit is built, how do we maintain that the snow melt products they use will always be the so-called environmental friendly ones, that the plantings that are put in place are what are more appropriate to this area and don't require either town water to keep fed, or they can perhaps use brown water for keeping things hydrated. A lack of pesticide use and the minimal plantings that need fertilizers. I think that I would like to see if we can have a consultant help us craft how to keep the long-term implications of having a large residential building there mitigated.
Ann Harrison.
I think design fell into the environmental category, but it will certainly, the environmental consultant is, I think Greg said, it will be in a firm. I think we could make this project a great deal more attractive by insisting on some design elements that break up the feeling that it's a Costco in a South California mall. So I would like to have somebody who can make some suggestions that could be cost effective and make the affordable, the market rate units more attractive to renters. Had one other note on environment. Underlining what Jeff and Becky have said, I'd like to know what's required by the state so we don't trade off something that we've got already for something and not get something that we actually want. So I don't want to go to bat for rules that the DEP will already insist on. And that's about my thoughts.
Let me come back to the design issue in a minute. First, we'll get through the environmental. There is something.
Eli, may I make a correction, please? Of something I said?
Sure.
I need to change my comment from brown water to gray. Thank you. That was,
Sure.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah. John. You're muted. Zoom 102.
I can't wait for Zoom 106.
Yeah.
You know, I think the other folks have pretty much mentioned all the time. I assume that all of the things that I want to touch on, I'm assuming that this review will involve stormwater, septic, blasting, and probably water supply. Are those the four topics that this environmental person is going to deal with? And when I say water supply, maybe it's affecting our water supply in terms of what's underneath Shingle Hill, not so much necessarily the pipes that's running across 128. But is that a correct assumption, Greg? Those four topics?
Yes, at a minimum, yes.
Okay, and that it will also, as was mentioned earlier, it'll include educate us on the DEP requirements, which we don't know what they are, but whatever applies here, so that we know what the standards are.
Correct.
I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so when we talked about this last time, oh, I'm not addressing you, I'm just making my comments now. So when we talked about this last time, or initially, we talked about environmental from in sort of two sub buckets, and one of them was impacts, immediate impacts from the construction proper, and then the other was long-term impacts to the area. So one of the questions that was posed in immediate impacts, there were actually two of them really. One was the type of material used for blasting, and one was a concern from a resident about impact to structures and potentially wells, potentially relatively far away due to the construction. So I know that the DEP has some basic standards for some of the environmental impacts. The high level, so we're going to be trying to produce some relatively high level constraints on the developer and let the ZBA sort out the details of how those are implemented. For environmental, I don't have a very good picture of what some of those high level constraints might need to be for construction impacts. We have those things that have been proposed and concerns from residents and from groups like MECT. But given this very specific locale, I'm interested in knowing other potential construction impacts that we haven't thought of that we might need to try to constrain in one way or another, and whether or not we do, whether or not the ZBA can take care of it on their own, or whether or not we need to constrain those things. And as far as the long-term impacts are concerned, I think most of my questions are already covered by MECT's concern and things that other board members have already stated. Yeah.
Eli, if I may have a question.
Sure.
Regarding the information we have received from both townspeople, Concom, MECT, sustainability, are these all going to be, and I know we're keeping a running list, but you know, there are some really good points brought up by those. Will we be able to forward some of these? And I'm just talking about, you know, things such as, you know, light pollution, noise pollution, things along those lines. Will these be forwarded on to a consultant as well?
Yeah, the more common ones, it was my thinking was the staff is going to, Sue and Greg will take the larger high level ones like light pollution and coalesce those along with our comments into guidance to the consultant. And then we'll get a shot at reviewing that.
I just wanted to make sure that was clarified. Thank you.
Yeah.
In their spare time, of course.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the way it goes.
Eli, I had one other issue that we have not addressed in terms of environmental, which is environmental construction and green construction, and how deeply we get into that.
What do you mean?
What do I mean?
Yes.
I mean energy efficiency. I mean green construction in the building itself. Possible solar on the roof. I'm concerned about the range of energy resources that a building of this size is going to take.
So in terms of scoping that for a consultant, presumably we would want to get back answers that we could actually have a hope of acting on. So maybe the way we would put that to the
Go ahead.
consultant. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so maybe the way we would put that is ask the consultant to provide us with a list of low cost, high impact green building measures that the developer could take to reduce the energy usage of the building.
Energy usage, water usage. I mean, Greg said that the firms that he's looking at that do this have got 40B experience, so it's not going to be their first rodeo.
Yep. Okay, I had a point that had escaped my mind, but I'm going to come back to the design item. So last meeting, we had talked about asking the planning board to make comments on design, the actual design of the building. And the planning board in their discussions around this wanted to make the recommendation to us that we would hire a design consultant as opposed to having the planning board themselves do this work. And the planning board will provide and is going to provide a letter of critique. I think it's actually, we have it in our packet. However, an design firm would be, design consultant would be something that we would want as part of the peer review process. That typically comes a little bit later in the process. So this is not one of the consultants that we're going to be teeing up right now. Greg and Sue, do you have any comments about when and how the design consultant might be injected into the process?
Well, so it really follows, I should say, from total size. So that'll drive the design considerably, and I think again you could identify with help of a professional, and some of the firms we're looking at have architects and design professionals on staff. But again, we could enumerate sort of the look and feel you're after, and they could articulate that for us, put it in architectural jargon, if you will, and you could review that, and that could become again that broader condition that then gets flushed out during the ZBA process that'll be taking place if it goes forward.
So then what you're saying is that this initial high-level design review would come from the firm that's doing the environmental and traffic, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I think we could, you could spend a session with the design professionals from the firm and say, here are our concerns, and these are the elements we'd like to see, and they could help articulate that in a standard or a couple free standards that you come up with.
Okay. All right, so it's 8:30. So unless there's other high level comments on these three or four areas of consultants, I'd like to talk about timeline a little bit. So the objective is to get these consultants working sooner rather than later so that we actually have some useful information to help us guide us in producing some of the initial conditions that we would like to negotiate with the developer. Greg has a fiscal consultant available, and other firms can be brought online relatively quickly. I said at the beginning of my meeting that we could get the final list of guidance to the consultants and the final proposals together and ratify them at a subsequent meeting. But I want to debate this right now with the board about how we want to proceed in terms of the timing. Do we want to have a separate special meeting to pull the trigger on some of these consultants? Do we want to pull the trigger on the fiscal consultant right now and authorize Greg to go ahead and put together the package with our RKG? I'm going to open this up to the board now to discuss, but let's spend a relatively limited amount of time on this, 10 minutes.
I think what we should do is we should go with Greg's recommendations and do this as quickly as possible. I don't see why we need to even hold back on the traffic environmental consultant. We should move. I mean, we're not going to be. I mean, the proposal is going to be vetted by the developer who's going to be paying for this to see that it's not too free ranging, but it's going to address issues early on that may be addressed later on by the ZBA. I think we should move.
Eli, I agree with Jeff. I think that given John Witten's years of experience and his recommendation of the RKG, I think the sooner we can get going, the sooner we have more information with which to work.
And I agree as well. Zoom 102.
That brings you back to Zoom 101.
I got to take it again. Okay.
Absolutely full speed ahead on the consultants. We can't make any intelligent decisions until we have information.
All right, Greg, if you guys build up that list of proposals, the more detailed list that you're going to be asking the consultants to pursue, and get the proposals back to the board. Will we have any wiggle room to make minor adjustments to those once they're underway?
Yes, I'm sure we can.
Okay, so we can get those proposals out and then get them to us and potentially other boards to give them a final chance to make some additional comments if need be. That sound reasonable to other board members?
Yes.
So I'm sorry, are you saying once we have them on board or before we get them on board?
No, get them on board.
Yeah, okay, all right.
So the process then would be to finalize those proposals, get the estimates from the consultants. Then Greg negotiates those proposals with to get the funding out of SLV, and then spins the consultants up. And Greg, do you need a vote authorizing this, or are you happy with the consensus of the board?
I think it would make sense to have an official vote just to authorize that to proceed.
All right, can I get a motion to authorize the town administrator to send a set of proposals to fiscal, traffic, environmental, and design consultants, negotiate costs with SLV Ventures, and hire those consultants?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Okay, I'll call
Just
that a
let-
second. Jeff Bodmer-Turner, and discussion. Ann Harrison.
Just for the notes, we want consultants on fiscal, environmental, traffic, and design. I think you only listed 3 of those, and I don't remember which one wasn't there.
Well, it was certainly my intent to say fiscal, traffic, environmental, and design. So I'll
I
accept
thought I
that.
heard 4. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I heard that.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Mr. Round,
Yes.
Mr. Bodmer-Turner,
Yes,
Ms. Harrison,
Yes,
Ms. Jakes,
Yes,
Mr. Bowling votes yes. All right, so now we're going to move into the part of the meeting where we are going to have some public comment. So I'm going to open us up for questions from the public. Bear in mind, we're going to, like I said, we're going to have a public forum where any and all questions can be asked on December 3rd. And at that forum, I expect to have a few more staff available. So I will anticipate having town council there, John Whitten. We may have DPW, fire, police, those sort of resources available, so that there will be a broader set of assets available to answer questions. So, but if you have questions or concerns relating to some of the discussions we've had tonight, please raise them. And if you have any other questions that you would like us to address over the next week or so, please feel free. So if you would please raise your hand and I will recognize you. I'll ask you to identify yourself and state your question, and we'll see what we can do for you. So Bill Cross is doing the actual honest to God raising his hand. I'll take Mr. Cross. Go ahead and unmute yourself. And
thank you. Thanks for all your work on this very complex process. Given the significance of the decision before you and the complexity of the process, I know that you want to have as prudent and judicious an analysis as possible. What do you expect to be the timing for the formal opening of the process after your consultants have delivered their reports?
so you mean, when do you think we'll actually go and start negotiating with the developer?
Yeah. I mean, can you talk about the timeline with respect to the formal opening and the process of negotiating? Does that happen before the formal opening or after? Can you kind of give us a sense of what the next 6 months look like?
Can you clarify what you think formal opening means, or what you mean by formal opening?
I think the term formal hearing is a defined term in the legislation.
So
So Eli, if I could help a little
go
bit,
ahead.
perhaps. So the formal hearings are before the zoning board of appeals. And that takes place only after the developer has received a letter of eligibility from the state. To get the letter of eligibility from the state, the developer either needs to have a letter of endorsement from the selectmen, or they go through DHCB, a state agency, and get their letter of eligibility. So before those formal hearings start, the developer needs to have that that ticket, if you will, from the state. and he gets it one of two ways, those two ways that I just outlined. So how long that takes to get that ticket, it varies. There's no set timeline for that. So it's hard to answer your question as to when we would actually see the comprehensive permitting process begin before the ZBA. Could be 6 months, could be 9 months, could be 12 months.
And the timing with which you would expect to begin negotiating the LIP?
So when go ahead, Ron.
So that'll depend a little bit on the information that we get back from the consultants. When we get the information back from the consultants, we're going to turn a bunch of that over to some of our boards. So for example, FinCom and Planning Board, Conservation Commission. And we're going to ask for additional opinions and analysis from them. The amount of analysis that they have to do will depend a little bit on the information that we get back from those consultants. So when we get a better idea from what they say, we'll be in a better position to sort of finalize our list of conditions and then set a time for when we're going to talk with the developer. It'll take a little bit of time to get the results back from the consultants. We'd hope to get at least some of our initial results back in the beginning of January, and then go back to our various different boards and ask them for input. And when we get that feedback from them in January, and we'll press them to push hard on that in early January so that we can know where we're going and when. Then we'll have a better idea of what the timeline is for our first meetings with the developer to begin negotiating on the list of conditions. And I don't know how long those meetings will take, but they could start as early as end of January, beginning of February, but it's going to depend on the outcome of the consultants and how we process the information.
Okay, thank you.
Other members of the public with questions? I don't know if folks are, okay, so we're not really using the Zoom feature of raising your hand. There's a little button on the Zoom interface which lets you raise a hand. So I happen to see, and most people don't have their video turned on, but I do see Connor was waving his hand. So go ahead, I'll recognize you. Give us your full name and your address, and we'll be going.
Hi, Eli. Connor Wynn, 10 University Lane. Which button do I press to?
There should be a little hand raise icon. I don't have it handy. I think it's on the right of the screen.
Eli?
Yeah.
Eli, if people push on the participants, if they just click on participants and then look at the very bottom of the pop-out, you'll see a notice that says raise
Oh,
hands.
look at that.
And just-
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, continue with your question.
Okay. So for potential development at the Pleasant Street site, are the problems chiefly political or economic? And then the second part of this question is, have the magnitude of these issues changed since development there was last seriously considered? Thank you.
Sue, you want to take that?
Sure. The only time that it was considered was a feasibility study performed by Mass Housing that provided us with some technical assistance to look at the sites. And they looked at the site specifically to see if it would be eligible for or reasonable to put an affordable housing, a standalone affordable housing project there. The engineering of that came back noting that a large complex, 30 or more units, would probably have a stormwater system costs in excess of $1 million And that kind of gave them, their assumption was that that would make it, development costs would not be feasible for a large project. Unfortunately, they did not finish, Mass Housing did not finish the project to give us all their assumptions and the actual cost that they were working with to indicate that that wouldn't be a feasible site. So it's a bit of an incomplete study. It is the study that the MAHT consultants are using to kind of flesh out. So we're using their engineering results and then putting it through our own sieve of assumptions, if you will, to take another look at it. And I don't think we've even gotten to the point to test that if there are political objections or resident objections. I don't think we've gotten that far to this point. If that answers your question.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Other members of the public with questions? Jim Dietrich, you want to ask a question? Jim,
Yes, I would like to ask a question.
Okay, before you do, I want to caution you. So you are on the zoning board of appeals. You will be adjudicating when the comprehensive permit application comes before you, you will be adjudicating that. You have to be very careful with regard to how you interact with these meetings, lest you run afoul of legal complications. So if you still wish to speak and ask a question, I suggest you bear that in mind and try to keep it purely as informational as possible, and maybe take care not to inject opinion.
Thank you very much. My question is a follow-up question to a questioner earlier. I think it was a Mr. Cross, but I couldn't tell by the names popping up on my screen. But nevertheless, just in anecdotal conversations with other members of the town, in being a member of the town and not being a member of the zoning board, there seems to be a lot of questions regarding the overall timeline.
Mr. Dietrich, I think I'm just going to be super conservative here and cut you off. The line that you're taking with regarding wearing one hat versus another, I think if you have a question.
You are cutting me off, and I do have a question.
Yeah, I know.
I'd like to answer the question first.
Actually, you know what? I'm sorry. Your position on the zoning board puts you in a different position.
I realize that.
And we were advised by town council that the zoning board needs to maintain a degree of separation in this process. Otherwise, we can run into trouble here. So if you have a question, what I would suggest is you put it in writing to town staff. We'll vet it and see if we can answer it reasonably here. And if it's a question that we think can safely be raised from you at the public forum that's coming up, we'll do it there. How about that?
Well, since you haven't heard my question, I think you are acting rather impulsively and cutting me off, since I never got to ask the question. However, I will, I'm not asking the question as a member of the zoning board.
Yeah, I can't let you do that. I have to think of the potential impact to the town here. You cannot wear two hats here right now.
I'm not wearing two hats. You haven't even heard my question.
That's the point.
That's the point. I'm not going to let you ask the question right now.
Fine.
Other members of the public? Connor, sure, why not? Go ahead.
Well, so
Bless you.
what is the size comparison between Upper School Street and the Pleasant Street location? If the development were to be more than 30 units at Pleasant Street, could that potentially mitigate the costs of the stormwater development price? And how would that compare with the costs of extending, say, sidewalks and other infrastructure to Upper School Street?
Oh, I see. I see. Are you asking this in the context of like swapping the two sites?
Well, it just seems like that would be a location for sustainable long-term development that fits more within Manchester itself. It seems like a more prime location for residential development. So I'm just wondering what the cost trade-off is between those two locations, and if there's a potential to build a larger development on Pleasant Street, if the potential larger development would offset the costs of stormwater mitigation.
So that would be a question that would be asked from the perspective of the developer, right? So, and again, I want to be clear that we're going to be addressing your question from the angle that you're getting at. Is it your question that if you look at the proposed development on Shingle Hill versus similar size development on or a larger development at Pleasant Street, would one be cheaper than the other? Is that me rephrasing your question accurately?
Not really. I guess Sue Brown was saying that the original consultant for a development of 30 units at Pleasant Street would have a $1 million stormwater mitigation cost. And the development on Shingle Hill is, of course, much larger. So I'm just wondering if the costs for building a Shingle Hill size development at Pleasant Street wouldn't end up being similar when you take into account the town's outlay for infrastructure improvements to develop Shingle Hill.
I guess I'll ask Sue Brown if and or Greg if they think they can take a crack at this question.
Eli, I can answer a few of the underlying questions and assumptions that might make the answer more apparent. The site at Pleasant Street is less than 7 acres in its entirety. Part of it is already protected. Most of it is impacted by wetlands, and there is less than, I think it was under 2 acres that is actually developable. So it really, while it appears to be a larger site, it really, the footprint for development is about what is covered by the buildings that are there now. So it really has a limited footprint. So something much larger than 30 or maybe even up to 50, anything larger than that, I just don't think would be possible.
Thank you. That really was the crux of my question, why Pleasant Street wasn't more seriously considered. So pardon my ignorance. Thank you.
No, it's a learning process. Thank you for your question.
Sarah Melish, you have your hand raised. Go ahead and you can speak. Same exact precautions that gave to Jim Dietrich apply to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So Jim is an alternate member of the ZBA, so he may or may not vote on the 40B development. But the other issue I'd like to raise is that people have raised the DPW site, the Manchester Housing Authority sites, and the fact of the matter is there's no way we can develop those in a time frame appropriate with respect to the 40B. The fact of the matter is the 40B has been presented to us and we don't have a whole lot of options for alternate sites.
Okay. Thanks for the comment. Other comments from the public? All right, it's looking like we don't have any additional comments tonight. Mr. Diedrich. Go ahead. You're muted.
Since you took a question from Sarah and you wouldn't even let me ask my question, I would appreciate at least being able to ask my question. My question is one of process. It is not one of approvals. I'm not even speaking as a zoning board member. You cut me off because you never even let me ask my question. I think that is very unfair. If I start to get off track, you have every right to cut me off. But until you hear what I had to say, I think you are acting very impulsively and not doing an effective job. Now, may I ask my question?
You can start to ask your question. I will reserve the option of cutting you off if I think that you will go into an area that will place us in some sort of legal jeopardy. And I'm sorry if that's going to seem a little bit authoritarian, but I'm going to be very conservative about that. Go ahead.
My question was, the timeline for this entire process, the entire timeline, seems to be, in the minds of many members of town, confusing. No one seems to understand what the process is and what the timeline is and how it all plays out. What I listened to tonight did not give me additional information according to that. I think you would do the town a favor by explaining the process clearly in these meetings and what it entails. I realize you have to get information from third parties, you have to make decisions, then you have to do this, and you have to do that. There are things that happen. I don't think the people in town, the citizens, appreciate what this is. And I don't think it's been made very clear to the citizens of the town. So that is my comment. That was my question to you. Transparency and explaining will go a long way in building confidence and approval. And I will shut up. Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, I'll apologize. You were right, and I was wrong. And you reminded me of something I meant to say a little bit earlier. So one of the things that I talked about earlier in previous meetings was we were going to be coalescing information from the questions asked from people and putting together updates to the 40B webpage, including basically a bunch of frequently asked questions and a more detailed timeline. And it had been my intent to go over a version of that, the set of updates to that tonight. We just got swamped with too many other things happening over the past several days. But you're right, we should absolutely be providing more detail on the timeline. We are going to be working, staff is working with Tiffany Marletta to produce a draft of that now. And we'll try and roll that out as quickly as we can and update it for people as quickly as we can as well. I don't know if we can get some of that done before the public forum. I'm trying to set that public forum up, like I said, December 3rd as quickly as possible, because I know people are very anxious to get more information. But yes, completely agree. And we will be producing that content for folks as quickly as we can. Other questions from the public? All right, well, we've hit 9 o'clock. So I'm going to wrap this up then, and remind folks to come to the public forum with all your questions. We will let that run as long as we need to let people ask questions, and there will be more opportunity after that public forum for other people to ask questions. Again, when we have our workshops up, I'll make sure that I reserve time at the end, or at least give people a heads up if I don't think we'll be able to do this. Sue Brown, did you have a final comment you wanted to make?
Eli, I just wanted to let people know that is the meeting that we're going to have a presentation of the findings of the housing production plan. And I just wanted to let people know that they can find that plan online and review it in advance. So that might facilitate some questions in that part of it. That's it.
Yep. Okay. So I think I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Becky, seconded by Ann Harrison. Any discussion? All in favor, Mr. Round,
Yes.
Ms. Jakes.
Yes, and
Ms.
thank you,
Harrison,
everybody.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Bodmer-Turner,
Yes.
Mr. Bowling votes yes. All right, good night, folks. And we'll see you real soon.
Thank you to
Night.
everybody who
Thank
hung
you.
on.